The following content contains material intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion advised. Hello, my lovelies. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I'm Madam Roman, and together let's put on our highest red-bottom slippers and strut our stuff down the silver brick road to the land of wisdom, as we explore true crime, dark histories, mysteries, and mayhem in a constant quest of empowerment, knowledge, and the insight to survival. And if you haven't already, don't forget to support the channel, like and subscribe. In the late night of a quiet Sunday on May 27, 2018, in Springfield, Massachusetts, police officers noticed a vehicle in traffic that had a broken taillight and flashed their lights on the patrol car to pull the car over. They had no idea of the discovery they were about to make or the horrendous actions of the man behind the wheel. But the realization hit them when the driver did not pull over but took off trying to evade them. The police gave chase, and fortunately, the pursuit was short-lived when the driver rammed into one of the cruisers when they tried to block him in. With the driver detained, the female passenger in the front seat was finally free to tell her tale. Police could see that she was bound and suffering gruesome injuries that had been inflicted by the man detained. She told them with gratitude that they had saved her life from the man that was going to kill her. She told of her horrendous ordeal of having been held prisoner for a month, being tortured the whole time. He had stabbed her in the abdomen, beat her with a hammer on several occasions, and repeatedly sexually assaulted her. The shaking woman was taken to the hospital where she would undergo treatment for a broken jaw and an infection on her leg that was so severe she almost lost her leg. Authorities identified the driver as Stuart Weldon, a 40-year-old resident. He's a wascally wabbit. Authorities identified the driver as Stuart Weldon, a 40-year-old resident of Springfield, Massachusetts. Springfield nowadays has benefited from a revitalization project, changing the inhabitants' landscape from darkened, closed storefronts to lively, hip businesses. Just on the border of Connecticut with its Titanic Historical Museum and surrounding country clubs and parks, Springfield was formerly a trading post and industrial town that suffered a downturn. A bigger Massachusetts town with a population of about 150,000, it has had its share of high crime, local corruption, poverty, and drugs. Springfield had become a central distribution hub for heroin production for bigger cities like Boston and New York, and Weldon had become known to sex workers and the criminal elements of the area as part of their enterprise, as well as to the local legal system as a repeat offender. Stuart Weldon was born in Queens on June 24, 1977. The Queens area was rife with crime and drug use during the 1970s. Weldon's father died suddenly when Weldon was a teen. In 1990, his mother moved them, in the hopes of a better life, to Montclair, New Jersey, which had a population less than 40,000. What? You can do about it. Now you gotta stay. The area is an idyllic small town with tree-lined streets of middle-class homes. It was safer with less crime. Her intentions may have been good, but it must have been hard for the African-American 13-year-old boy to try to assimilate to a wealthier, mostly white-populated town where everyone knew your business. You are not going anywhere. Everybody knows your business. Unfortunately, perhaps it was too late, and the negative influence that Weldon had become accustomed to, sexual abuse, pornography, and drugs, had followed him in his own mind. In high school, he was diagnosed as having severe ADHD, dyslexia, and learning disabilities. Without the appropriate treatment or resources, these obstacles became hindrances to his education. It would not take much to assume that in response to this frustration, he began to feel inadequate. Perhaps rather than face more failure with the normal expectations of society, he decided that a life of criminal activity was his best expression of his rage. When Weldon was 19 years old, he was starting to begin his criminal behavior. In 1996, he and a friend convinced 3 teenage girls at a local mall that they would take them home. He dropped 2 of the girls off, but kidnapped the 3rd at gunpoint. Weldon and his accomplice drove to another location and sexually assaulted the girl. They had dropped her off at her house and then fled. Weldon was later arrested and convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault. By 2005, Weldon had a significantly lengthy criminal resume, with offenses like breaking and entering, arson, sexual assault, and kidnapping, just to name a few. He had done short stints of time in prison on several occasions. The 28-year-old Weldon was also a wanted man of assault on a woman on the street and a police officer that he had bit on the leg when he had tried to help the woman. Weldon was arrested for the assault, but his mother posted his $1,000 bail. He later cut off the ankle monitor that had been given at his release. When trying to detain him, he fled in a high-speed chase with police, which ended with him ramming his vehicle into a police car. Charges of assault with a dangerous weapon and assaulting a police officer were filed against Weldon, adding to his nefarious pursuits. He was sentenced and served time, after which he was released and returned to live with his mother in her home that had been converted into 2 apartments in Springfield, Massachusetts. Weldon continued dealing drugs and frequenting sex workers. With no real consequences or punishments, he was feeling he didn't have to worry about repercussions for his actions. He was committing various crimes that represented his disregard for anyone's safety or well-being. Without legal restraint as even a small moral code, his desire for violence and control were escalating. As a described sexual sadist by some forensic psychologists, his need to inflict pain and control through violence and torture were increasingly needed and escalating for his sexual satisfaction. In other words, much like Richard Cottingham, the Times Square killer, which I did a video about, who was also a sexual sadist, Weldon got off on inflicting pain on non-consenting victims. He was arrested and convicted on many crimes, but his sentences were never too long for him to serve, if he served any time at all. Even after his most recent capture, authorities had to arrest him on previous charges of assault with a deadly weapon and kidnapping, instead of the current charges of kidnapping and the assault on the woman he had tortured in his basement for a month. Because, and this is just my guess, the woman was the mother of his child, and because the authorities feared they lacked the proof they needed to solidify a conviction. They also felt they lacked evidence to obtain a search warrant for the house where he had kept the woman. But soon after her rescue, a call would change everything. To the horror of a shocked public, his crimes and victims would be revealed. Just days after his arrest and pleading not guilty, Weldon was held on $1 million cash bail. He was still in police custody, and it was unlikely that he was going to make bail for release. Perhaps this reprieve was why his mother felt safe enough to call authorities about the horrible smell coming from inside her house. She said she was afraid there was a dead animal in the basement apartment and was too afraid to go check it out herself. Which begs the question, this is her house and her son. Why would she be too afraid to go check it out herself? Unless she knew that his behavior was so bad that the possibility of something too awful for her to face was down there. It seems that she was also afraid of him. When authorities responded to the call, they recognized the putrid smell 50 feet from the house. They knew it was decomposition. Responding police officers went into the lower level of the home. The rooms were in disarray with not much furniture but miscellaneous strewn about. The rooms resembled a medieval torture chamber, with handprints of blood smeared down the walls, hooks in the ceilings with cords dangling down from them, and blunt instruments with blood and hair still attached to them. The smell was overwhelming and horrendous as they continued closer to its source. Finally, in the farthest part of the basement, they came upon a bathroom and the lifeless body on the floor. As seasoned emergency responders, police have experienced the horrific scenes of all levels, but the level of depravity that one human could inflict on another was visible to all on the scene. The victim was bound with duct tape, gagged, and with lividity in decomposition, it was determined that she had been there about a month. It was also later determined that she had a broken hyoid bone, which usually occurs during manual strangulation. With the shocking discovery, law enforcement personnel from crime scene technicians, detectives, and other specialists descended on the house to gather evidence and investigate the events that had occurred. As investigators were combing the scene and the area surrounding the house, it became distinctly clear that the basement was not the only point of concern. In the garage, next to a crib and under cardboard and miscellaneous, lay another decomposing body. The victim appeared to have been deceased longer than the victim in the basement. Police were beginning to fear that the perpetrator of these crimes was a serial killer. And after noticing disturbed dirt on the floor in the shed on the property, not 40 feet from the neighbors and even closer to the back of the house, and verifying with a cadaver dog the presence of something gruesome, the discovery of yet another victim that had been buried was made. The skeletal state of the victim led investigators to conclude that the person had been there even longer than the other two. With the body bound with internet cables showing the malicious intentions, authorities confirmed their suspicions of a serial killer. With time and effort, investigators were starting to piece together these grisly discoveries. They determined, with the identities of the victims, that Weldon was choosing his victims based on their vulnerability and weaknesses, luring his victims on the pretense of his reputation as a drug dealer and user. He used their addiction to drugs to coax them back to his place to get high together and hang out without them ever knowing that it would be fatal. He knew that fighting addiction to drugs was a monumental task with easy failure, and all he had to do was provide the right temptation for the opportunity he needed to satiate his desires. Authorities had determined the identity of the most recent victim on the property that had been found in the basement. Through her distinct tattoos and fingerprints, she was identified as 27-year-old Kayla Escalante, who had been last seen by her family in December before. She was known to be struggling with addiction to substances, making her habits unpredictable and inconsistent. But despite this, she was a loving, selfless woman with a fun-loving wackiness about her. And above all, she was a mother of a young daughter. A daughter that would not have the opportunity to grow up knowing her mother. The woman that was found in the garage was identified as Ernestine Ryans. She was a 47-year-old mother and happily anticipating her soon-to-be grandmother status with a soon-to-be-born baby in the family. She had been reported missing by her family on March 18, 2018, just over 2 months before her discovery. Ernestine was known as mischievous, popular, and courageous enough to fight for those she wanted to protect. The last body to be found on the property was identified by dental records as America Jordan Canales Linden. Born February 9, 1984, she was 34 years old when Weldon took her life. She had recently completed a drug rehab program. Jordan was the mother of 2 daughters. She loved reading urban fiction and mysteries and having her nails done in red, pink, or purple. Her family had reported her missing December 1st of 2017 after having no contact with her since June. 25 days after reporting her missing, police posted a missing persons post on Facebook, but no word was given in additional information to the family regarding the investigation until her remains were found. With the gruesome findings at Weldon's mother's house, he was charged with 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, and attempted murder in June. News outlets covered the story nationwide. This coverage brought Weldon's other victims forward with their stories of survival and community of strength and determination to get justice for those he brutalized. While in police custody, it was apparent that the serial rapes that had been occurring in the area had stopped. This led authorities to believe, along with the victims' stories, that Weldon had also been the serial rapist that they had been looking for. While Weldon was free, his victims were terrified to tell of his crimes against them for fear that the justice system would not believe them, or worse, that they would get into trouble because of their own involvement in sex work and drug use. But after his arrest, women that he had targeted were able to feel that he could not hurt them any longer, and that someone would actually believe what they had been through. In August 2018, Weldon was charged with over 50 crimes for those he murdered and raped. Weldon pleaded not guilty. But authorities were on to Weldon. They believed that because of the heinousness of his crimes and the brazenness of his actions, that Weldon was preparing for an insanity defense to get off easier for the crimes he had committed. It seems that he was paving the way, that he wasn't capable of knowing right from wrong or what he was doing. He stated that the victims had been bound after death to make moving them to another location easier. But the ME refuted this, with findings consistent with Weldon's victims having a pulse when the restraints were placed on them. Not to mention, there were bottles of bleach found in the basement, along with spots that appeared to have been cleaned. His own admission of wanting to move the bodies to a more concealed location, or even burying them, was proof of organized pattern of clear intent, or acknowledging that the covering up of victims because what he did was wrong. So, knowing right from wrong. Weldon's intent to evade justice was also apparent when victims that had survived their encounters with him recounted their experiences. Weldon was said to have talked about demons under the stairs, lit candles in a pentagram on the floor, and rambled as if chanting or talking to some satanic presence. Authorities were ready with more evidence to the contrary. They had pieced together a timeline in which it was evident Weldon committed murders only when his mother was away from the house, and when his mother was at the house, he would let those women go. They also had internet searches that Weldon had done on how to get rid of the smell of decaying animals, knowing not to search bodies. Weldon's trial was set to begin April of 2020, but, well, we all know what a shit show April 2020 was. So his trial was delayed until October 2021. Prior to his trial, Weldon was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation to determine his mental stability and soundness for trial. It was determined that he was fit to stand trial, that he did have the mental capacity to know what was right from wrong. In other words, he premeditated the murders. With his sanity defense no longer an option, 2 weeks before the trial was to start, Weldon pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. On September 30th, 2021, Weldon was in court where he would have to face some of those he committed crimes against and the families of the women that could no longer speak for themselves. Stuart Weldon was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole to run consecutively. He is currently housed at the Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. I want to mention that the woman that was rescued from Weldon's month-long abuse, she was in the house at the time the body of Kayla was decomposing in the bathroom. I can only imagine the terror of being beaten, raped, and tortured, knowing that in the other room there was a worse fate that was waiting. And if the smell was so bad that it was detectable 50 feet from the house, why didn't anyone call the police sooner? The house is kind of on a main street, and there is a sidewalk, so it must see foot traffic. So, no neighbors, no one walking by. One call may not have saved the life of Ernestine, but perhaps Kayla. This case was another instance in which the perpetrator fell through the cracks of the legal system. He knew the vulnerability of the victims and their hesitation to go to authorities about the things he had done to them. But the district attorney in this case did do something you don't see very often. He acknowledged this lack of legal consequence for Stuart Weldon with a statement, "We did everything we could to keep him behind bars, but that wasn't the outcome." He and his assistant gave the impression that change is happening and went on to convey a message that vulnerable people like these women need a voice, respect, dignity, and worth that they deserve regardless of their situation in life. He remarked on the suffering that those with addiction and mental issues endure and the need for resolutions. So what are today's Madam Roman wisdom highlights? Number 1, change can be slow, but with dedication and diligence, it can happen. Number 2, never go to the second location. Second locations, especially if not in public places, generally turn deadly. And number 3, your nose knows. If you smell something sus, let someone know. If it turns out to be nothing, no harm. But wouldn't you be horrified to find out that you had a serial killer in your neighborhood and you knew something was off and you did nothing? It's okay to be a Gomez. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you for watching, and as always, be safe. Sending you silver streaks of wisdom.